guys. We're gonna start the second part of the central nervous system. And today we will focus mainly on the brain. And in this section, we will be able to describe the embryonic development of the human brain. I believe we finished this part last time with the spinal cord. Then we will go over to identify the major regions, parts of the adult brain, which is cerebrum, then diencephalon, brainstem. So those regions we're going to talk. We'll identify the functional areas of the brain, particularly in the cerebral cortex. So in different region of the brain has different functions. So we're going to go over there. And then we will identify the location of the ventricles, covering of the brain, and inside the ventricle we have CSF. So how CSF is produced, how it flows, and how it is absorbed in the body. So we'll talk about meninges, the CSF and CSF flows. After that, we will talk about the structure and function of the three basic division of the brainstem, which is midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. And we will talk about them. So that's the brainstem. And then later we will talk about the diencephalon. Diencephalon has three parts, which is the thalamus, hypothalamus, and epithalamus. We'll go over them too. So we have a little bit longer lecture, so I will be slightly faster today. Okay. Before we start with a clinical case. A 26-year-old female presented to a physician in a private office with complaint of headache, neck pain, fever, and vomiting after 3 weeks of middle ear infection. So middle ear is connected to our dura mater of the brain, and that's why infection from the middle ear easily spread to the meninges, and this is the case of meningitis. On examination of fever and stiff neck were noted, and when we do lumbar tapping, which is called lumbar puncture, which showed more than 6,500 count of white blood cells. Then high protein. Based on these information, what is the possible pathophysiology of this condition? So this looks like somebody has middle ear infection, and from there infection has spread to meninges, and then it affects the CSF. So we take CSF and do biochemical analysis of the CSF and to see what is increased and what is decreased. So usually sugar, protein, and other electrolytes are usually lower than our blood plasma. And in this case, everything increased. Sugar decreased, but protein increased in meningitis. So that is meningitis. When we talk about meningitis, keep in mind this question, and we will go over them. Okay. So last time we talked about it, the development of the brain. This always covers this area. Okay. So embryonic development of brain, last time we talked about it. Like we start with tube, 3 swelling, 5 swelling, and then outer part develop into adult brain, and the cavity inside is the ventricles. Okay, so this we have done, so we're not going to spend time here. The This is doing graph. Okay, so basic part and organization of the brain. In adult brain, you see here, this is, we are looking from the lateral side of the brain. And with different color. The gray color is the cerebrum, the pink is cerebellum, and the brain stem is inside the brain, and the diencephalon is also inside. So you see there is a different color, diencephalon, and then brain stem. So the topmost part of the brain is cerebrum. Then in this diagram, you cannot see, but in deep within the cerebrum, the deep inside the cerebrum is white matter, but outer part is gray matter. And inside the gray matter, there is another group of cell bodies that is called basal nuclei, which you cannot see in this diagram. Then we have diencephalon, which is the another group of nuclei deep in the medulla of the cerebrum, which has three parts: thalamus, hypothalamus, and epithalamus. Epithalamus you cannot see, posterior part here. And then the brain stem. Brain stem has here the midbrain, the bridge-like structure pons, and the medulla oblongata, and then continuous is the spinal cord. Okay, so midbrain, pons, medulla oblongata. This three structure is called brain stem. And behind the brain is a small brain here that is called cerebellum. Cerebellum is a main organ of initiation, continuation, and a stoppage of movement and balance. Okay. So the basic structure of the brain, organization of the cerebrum and cerebellum. In the cerebrum and cerebellum. So let's compare the cerebrum, cerebellum, and the spinal cord. So last time we did spinal cord. Do you guys remember what was the outer part of the spinal cord, whether it was white matter or gray matter?
White matter?
White matter. It was white matter. And the medulla or inner part of the spinal cord was gray matter. In cerebrum and cerebellum, it is just opposite. So in the cerebrum, there is centrally located gray matter in the cerebrum and cerebellum. Those are like medulla oblongata, the cerebral basal ganglia, diencephalon. Those are the centrally located gray matter. Then there is outside this centrally located gray matter, there is slightly externally located white matter. And then if you go further out, additional layer of gray matter external to those white matter is in the cerebrum, which is only found in the cerebrum. That's why this area of gray matter in the cerebrum is called neocortex. Neocortex. Because this is found in highly developed, specialized animals like human being. You will not find those things in lower animals. And this is due to group of neurons migrated externally. So cerebral cortex formed from neuronal cell bodies, and they are in the cerebrum and cerebellum. So cerebral cortex is gray matter, particularly the outside. And these gray matters are the neuronal cell bodies. So let's see here. We can show you. Let me go here so you can see. I will come back, but I want to show you. So this is frontal section. You see the brain? This is posterior part of the brain. This is the anterior. So this is frontal lobe, occipital lobe, parietal lobe here. So if you cut in the middle, frontal section of the brain, you see the outer part, gray looking. Similarly here. So these are the gray matter, and then you have white matter. And you cannot see, it is not, this is for different purpose, this diagram, so you cannot see other gray matter inside, deep within the white matter, okay? If you see brain surface is not as smooth. So there is bumps, there is fissures. So there is furrows and fissures. The bumps are called the gyrus. And the fissures, the small fissures like shallow fissures are called sulcus. And this is the diagram showing the lateral side of the human brain. And human brains, all the lobes are named after the which cranial bone covers it. So this is the frontal part, so we call them frontal lobe. Then there is, this area is temporal bone, so temporal lobe. This area is occipit, so occipital lobe. And then here is parietal bone, so this is parietal lobe, okay? This is anterior, this is posterior. Each lobe of the brain has several functional areas in the cerebral cortex, okay? And these lobes are usually separated from each other by deep sulcus. And those main sulcus, one of the sulcus is central sulcus. Central sulcus separates from frontal lobe to parietal lobe. Here is another parieto-occipital sulcus here, this sulcus. This separate, not parieto-occipital, the lateral sulcus. This lateral sulcus separates temporal lobe from frontal and parietal lobe. And here another will be parieto-occipital sulcus. So these different sulcus separates the brain in different lobes. And then in each lobes, there is special functional areas of the brain. So how scientists found these lobes? By taking the MRI scan and poking different region of the brain body, asking different functions, and then finding the areas. That's how these all area we found. So here, in front of the central sulcus, which is the frontal lobe, most of the motor areas lies. And this is only the left hemisphere of the brain. Same thing you're going to see in the right hemisphere of the brain. So everything, whatever structure is in the left hemisphere of the cerebral cortex, you have the same functional areas in the right hemisphere of the cerebral cortex. So here in front of central sulcus, all the motor areas and other areas are listed. And in the postcentral area, you have postcentral sulcus area, all the sensory areas are listed. So let's first sensory areas. Sensory area and related association area. So these areas are responsible for sensation like touch, pain, pressure, vibration, vision, touch, smell, all the sensory areas. So in front of central sulcus, you have primary motor cortex, and behind the central sulcus, you have primary somatosensory cortex. This cortex means when you touch your finger, let's say you hold your pain. So touch of your pain passes and comes to this primary somatosensory cortex. So you feel you are touching something, but you don't know what you are touching. That perception of what kind of a structure you are touching, whether it's rough, smooth, rubbery, soft, that is perceived by somatosensory association cortex. So association cortex recognize what kind of touch it. And this area together is called somatic sensory area. Then in the posterior area, you see here, we have visual. In the occipital lobe, we have primary visual cortex. And then nearby here in front of it is visual association area. So when you see an object, when I see this pen, the light from the pen falls on my retina, and then retina produce action potential, which comes here in the primary visual cortex, and we feel I have seen something, but I don't know what that object is. That is perceived by neurons here in the visual association area. That is the vision area of your brain. Another area is the uh, here, the primary auditory cortex. See here, primary auditory cortex. So in this area is this is the deep within the temporal and parietal area. This area, when you hear a sound like when I say hi, that sound from your ear enter your internal ear, and from internal ear, the electrical impulse reaches here and you hear the sound, but you don't hear exactly what exactly it is. So it comes to in this association area. Association area exactly associated, it is the sound from your instructor, and then from there, there is another area which is called Wernicke's area here, which works with association area. And this area, basically, this whole area, the outlined area, this area basically understand what exactly I am saying, like hello, or if I say, what is the parts of central nervous system, you exactly understand. And then this area makes the decision too. Like what if I ask, what is the parts of central nervous system, this area understand the question and then gives the command from there to the other area of the brain to perform the duty. That is called where Wernicke's area within the posterior association area. So it is posterior association area. This all area is Wernicke's area. Okay. Uh, then here you have gustatory area, taste area, where you taste something, you put on tongue, and you have salt, sour, sweet, everything is perceived here, electrical impulse. And then it works with insula. Insula is also the emotion area. That's why the gustatory or sense smell is always associated with taste, and smell is always associated with emotion because they are together. Now in the motor area, the in front of the precentral gyrus, you have primary motor cortex. This area sense, so there is motor neurons, first order motor neurons. These motor neurons send actions to the uh, spinal cord through the thalamus. And then from the spinal cord, it comes to our body and we control our body. So that is motor cortex. In front of motor cortex, you have premotor cortex area here, which also coordinates with the a lot of stuff like vision and the control of the body. Then you have frontal eye field, which works with visual area. And here is Broca's area. Broca's area is called speech area. This area, as I said, when you hear sound, I said, what is this part of central nervous system? Then you hear that first, then it comes here in the Wernicke's area. Wernicke's area comprehend, and then it goes to your the Broca's area, and then Broca's area decide what is the response. Then it goes to motor area. Motor area sends the motor neurons to your neck in the pharynx and larynx, and you contract muscle and you speak. Okay. Then there is association, anterior association area, prefrontal cortex. In this area, this is the very important area. You have working memory for a special task, like what is the position of your body, where is the location, memory of location, orientation, higher mental function, executive area for the task managed as working memory for object recall task, solving problem, multitask, higher mental function, calculation, judgment. These all are in this area of the brain. So this is the functional areas of the cerebral cortex. I'm just giving you some idea of these areas. I focus more in physiology, these areas, okay? And the same areas when you see from lateral areas, they are here, from the medial side of the brain. In the medial side, you see there is corpus callosum of the brain. There is fornix, cingulate gyrus. Okay, so if you cut the brain, so here in the right side, you have sensory area cut in the sensory, frontal cut section in the sensory map in the postcentral gyrus. And this is the motor map in the precentral gyrus. And then it is mapped small human structure, which is called homunculus. What you see here, the outer part or the lower part of the brain sensory area cover the upper part of the body. You see here, and the inner area or the lower part of the brain covers the upper part of the body, like hands, for the sensation. So let's see, if you are you need to get the sensation from your toe, and if you pinch your toe, this part of this inner or upper part of the brain will be activated. Similarly, in the motor area too, if you want to move your toe, you have to activate the neurons in your inner or upper part of the brain. And if you have to activate the lower part of the body, then upper part of the brain. And upper part of the body, like head, the lower part of the lower part of the brain. So this is just opposite, okay? And the sensation from right side of the body goes to the left side of the brain, and from the left side of the body, it goes to the right side of the brain. Now, ventricles of the brain. So brain is not a solid organ. Brain is covered by CSF, and brain contains CSF inside. So ventricles are expansion of the brain central cavity, which is filled with cerebrospinal fluid, and its short name for CSF, cerebrospinal fluid, is CSF. CSF is cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, cerebrospinal fluid, and this is the ventricles in the brain. If this is the ventricles of the brain is ventricles are lined with one of the supporting cells of the brain that is called ependymal cells, and these cells filter blood from nearby capillaries and filter some fluid, electrolytes, some protein, some glucose, and put into the cavities in the form of CSF. So CSF is the product of blood filtrate, okay? Continues with each other. So each ventricle continues with each other with the central canal of the spinal cord, as well as subarachnoid space of the brain. Okay, so those ventricles are lateral ventricle 2, third ventricle, cerebral aqueduct, and fourth ventricle. Okay, let's see in the diagram, which will be easier. So here, this is the brain, anterior view and lateral view. I want you to spend time, a minute here, and orient yourself. So this, in the anterior view, you are looking at subject from front, and this is the 3D cavity of the structure of the ventricles. So there is ventricle, there is third ventricle, there is fourth ventricle, but there is not first ventricle or second ventricle. Why is not? So here, this is right ventricle, this is right hemisphere, this is the left cerebral hemisphere. So if you cut like here in the middle of this brain and see this brain from side, you're not going to see even lateral ventricle. because it is deep within the, look at my hands. Let's see these two hands. You see here, two of these my hands are my ventricles. And these two ventricles inside my head. And this is the middle. So this is like ventricles are like here. And ventricles has the ventral horn, anterior horn, and the posterior horn. They are like comma. Okay. So this is right lateral, sorry, left lateral ventricle, right lateral ventricle. It has inferior horn. It has anterior horn here. The surface of these ventricles are lined with mass of capillaries called choroid plexus. These choroid plexus produce the fluid, and then it's sent to the small opening hole that is called interventricular foramen. From there, then it comes to third ventricles. The boundary of third ventricle, both sides, you see this area and this area. This is the area of diencephalon. So fourth ventricle is covered by diencephalon of each side of the cerebral hemisphere. Mainly the thalamus and hypothalamus is lining the ventricle. So this is cavity. Ventricles are not the solid organ, they are cavity. Now third ventricle then pass down through a very thin duct that is called cerebral aqueduct. Aqueduct means very thin duct. And this aqueduct is covered by the midbrain and the pons. And then it opens into larger cavity that is called fourth ventricle. Fourth ventricle is covered posteriorly by cerebellum and some part of the medulla oblongata and the pons. Okay. Once it reaches the fourth ventricle, then there are several openings we're going to talk about. This is the tough concept. So I want you to pay attention here. When you see from the lateral side, you see better diagram here. So this is lateral ventricle. Then it is coming into interventricular foramen. And then into the third ventricle. And through the third ventricle, you see there is cerebral aqueduct. You see? And then once it comes to the fourth ventricle, then there is lateral opening. Lateral opening get into, this is lateral aperture 2. In the left side, this is left, and in the right side, which you cannot see, that will be right lateral aperture. And they open into subarachnoid space. So now CSF is getting inside the subarachnoid space around the brain. And then you have a median aperture here. Median aperture goes around the cerebellum and here in the brain, between the cerebellum and the brain, in the subarachnoid space. Median aperture also get in the subarachnoid space around the central canal. And then there is another median opening, which is in the central canal. And at the end of the spinal cord, at the conus medullaris, the CSF also from the central canal enters the subarachnoid space in the spinal cord and then joins the brain. So it is produced in the brain, comes outside the brain and spinal cord and goes back in the venous system as a flow. And we're going to talk about that next slide. Okay. So last time we talked about it, subarachnoid space, the protection of the brain you see here. So you have a scalp, you have periosteum, and then all the meningeal layer. So here you see the subarachnoid space, yes? Where is subarachnoid space? This is space. So when the blood is, the CSF is produced in the subarachnoid space. Then it comes to your brain. And in the brain, you see there's some bumps of the arachnoid villus. We call them arachnoid granulation. CSF then passes from here into the veins, plus in this arachnoid villus. From there, it get into the sinuses, venous sinuses. These venous sinuses then drain into the internal jugular vein, then in superior vena cava, and then it goes to the heart. Okay. So let's see here. And this is look at this diagram. And I have written here, I want you to read. Can you guys see can you guys see this note here?
Only when it's not in.
We can see it now.
Okay, so look at that note too. Look at 1 minute, because this is tough concept. So this diagram is all about the production, flow, and absorption of CSF. Okay. Read at least this, my note, so you understand what I'm saying. Okay, so CSF can be produced in the lateral ventricle, which you cannot see in this diagram. Then in the third ventricle, in the wall of fourth ventricle. So choroid plexus are the blood vessel covered by ependymal cells. In the lateral ventricle, when it is produced, you see here through the interventricular foramen, this arrow. From lateral ventricle, it is coming to the third ventricle from the right side of the brain. In the third ventricle, you see this pinkish structure, they are making an ependymal cell are filtering and putting into the third ventricle. So third ventricle makes itself, plus it is getting from the lateral ventricle. Then it comes into the third ventricle. Through here, it passes through the cerebral aqueduct, then it comes to the fourth ventricle. See, fourth ventricle. From the fourth ventricle, you have lateral aperture. It is in the right lateral aperture, left have been already removed in this diagram. From the lateral aperture, here, from the fourth ventricle, where are we going? Right and left lateral aperture, plus the median aperture here, you see? And also the central canal. So from here, lateral aperture, it passes to the subarachnoid space of the brain. Subarachnoid space of the cerebrum. From this median aperture, it goes 3 places. First, it goes around the subarachnoid space, around the cerebellum, and then join the subarachnoid space around the cerebrum. The second, here, it goes around the subarachnoid space around the spinal cord. And third, it drains into the central canal, which is the central hole of the spinal cord. Look, guys, the how a study is hard. I'm going to go a little bit here. How many things, how many terminology I'm explaining at once? And if you have not previous understanding of other parts of the brain, it will be so hard to understand and follow. That's why you have to build up, you have to be on top of every day what you want to learn, okay? So now CSF is where? From the fourth ventricle, all the CSF are in the subarachnoid space, yes?
Yes.
From the subarachnoid space and central canal, at the bottom central canal also it get into subarachnoid space. Now you see the arrow, it is flowing. And then it comes in the subarachnoid villus, which is absorbed into the large veins under the subdura matter, that is called subdural venous sinuses. And those from the subarachnoid space, it's go to arachnoid granulation or arachnoid villus, and then subdural venous sinuses, and then internal jugular vein, and then heart. So it is produced around 500 ml from blood put into the inside the brain and outside the brain, and they collect all the waste product, provide some nutrition, maintain chemical homeostasis of your brain, provide electrolytes to the brain, and then waste product excreted through the vein to the heart and goes to your kidney and you excrete the waste product. So if there is any blockage anywhere, let's see there is infection of the meninges when you call meningitis, then what happens? There will be block, or there is tumor. Let's see, here is the tumor in the cerebral aqueduct line, ependymoma. It will be blocked, and then fluid will be inside the brain or in the subarachnoid space. If fluid is building, if the baby's head is not ossified, the sutures, then brain will expand, and that condition is called the hydrocephalus. You see here, this is the hydrocephalus, big head. What do? Doctor put a shunt here in the head and then slowly drain that tube from the subarachnoid space into the tummy. So fluid is slowly, and once everything subsides, then they remove that structure. So CSF has a lot of functions.
Mr. Shah, does the head go back to normal?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. Okay. So if you have meningitis or encephalitis, that means there is infection of the meninges or the brain tissue, and that infection can change the chemical composition of CSF because CSF is continuous with the brain indirectly or directly. And that's why in that case we take CSF, but we don't take CSF from the brain because it will be tough to take out. So the easiest location is between the L4 and L5 because in this area there is no spinal cord extending here because a spinal cord ends at the level of
L1 or L2.
Good. It spans at the L1 or L2, but subarachnoid space is between the L4 and L5. So if I prick here, skin, fat, connective tissue, then if this needle get inside the subarachnoid space, just pull the piston here. You don't have to even pull CSF. Due to the pressure of CSF, easily CSF drips from here and you can collect. And then you can do culture and sensitivity test, or you can do biochemical analysis. What is the amount of glucose, sugar, what is the microorganism to diagnose meningitis or encephalitis or any cancers. Yeah. So where we put needle in lumbar puncture needle between L4 and L5. Why? If we go like L1 or L2 or between thoracic 12 and L1, what will happen?
You kill the spinal cord.
Yes, you will
This one.
damage the spinal cord tract and you can cause paralysis of the body. Yeah.
Dr. Shaw, is
Uh-huh.
that is that would that be the same area when women are going to give birth where you get the epidural?
Yes, epidural is in that area and you can give epidural. So if you like L5 area, if you give the lignocaine, or we call it Gylocard, in the L5 area, so in the fat, local anesthetic is sprayed easily, and then they numb all the spinal nerves below that region. And all the reproductive area, spinal nerves are below that. So you can see the baby is passing, you are conscious, but your body part is numb, so you have no pain. Yes, that's the area, but we give in epidural area, not in the subarachnoid area.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and that is called saddle anesthesia. Brain stem includes midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. So there are brain stem has several functions, produce autonomic behavior necessary for survivals. So all the autonomic behavior like autonomic breathing, automatic heart contraction, automatic blood pressure maintenance, everything, our hormone release, everything is controlled by the brain stem. This is the area where passage for all fiber tracts running between cerebrum and spinal cord. So from the spinal cord, all the sensory fiber pass through it. All the motor fibers from the brain pass through it. And they are heavily involved with innervation of the head and face. So this is brain stem from where most of the cranial nerves exit from. And you're going to see that in next lecture when we talk about peripheral and autonomic nervous system. I may forget, I want to tell you guys, next slide on Wednesday is all about the peripheral and autonomic nervous system. So peripheral nervous system, we're going to touch chapter 14, very brief, not like a lot, 5-6 slides. And we will focus mainly on the autonomic nervous system, okay? So for example, in brain stem, 10 of the 12 pairs of cranial nerve attached to it. So only first cranial nerve and second cranial nerves are not coming from the brain stem because these two are coming from the cerebrum. Okay, so you can see here. See, this is the cerebrum here. And then from here, it's midbrain, this area, pons, medulla oblongata, and then spinal cord. So you see first cranial nerve is olfactory nerve. Olfactory nerve, this olfactory bulb is extending in your nose, roof of your nose where you smell. And then here is optic nerve, which comes here nearby your eye in the frontal lobe. So these two are exiting from the cerebrum. But after that, everything, all the cranial nerves. See, oculomotor, trochlear, trigeminal, then abducens, facial, vestibulocochlear, glossopharyngeal, vagus, accessory, and hypoglossal. These all are extending from the, coming off from the brain stem. So these cranial nerve exit from brain stem, makes a hole in the cranium, and then comes outside to supply your head, muscles, organs in the head. Okay, and some goes down, also supply the visceral organs. Okay, this is the same structure, but in the real brain. So you can see olfactory bulb, the cadaver. Okay, so brain stem after the midbrain, in the midbrain, here, let me show you. This midbrain has two structures, superior colliculi and inferior colliculi, this area here. And those superior colliculi and inferior colliculi, superior colliculi, they call corpora quadrigemina. They are for visual reflex and auditory reflex. So superior colliculi is for visual reflex and inferior colliculi is for auditory reflex. Like when you see something and you get like a very heightened emotion, this is due to that superior colliculi. When you hear something and you immediately move your head towards that, that is the auditory reflex. Okay. The pons helps the medulla oblongata to maintain the rhythmic respiration. Okay, so autonomic respiration is maintained by rhythmicity center in the medulla oblongata with the help of pons. Okay, let's talk about the medulla oblongata now. So this is the medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata contains most of the vital centers of the brain. This is the most caudal level of the brain stem. Is continuous with the spinal cord, and choroid plexus lies in front of the fourth ventricle. Medulla oblongata contains most of the vital center, like center for respiration, autonomic respiration, center for blood pressure, center for cardiac center, vasomotor center, sneezing center, coughing center, they all are there. The pyramids of the medulla lie on the ventral surface. So if you go, this is called pyramid. Okay. And these pyramids contains the motor tracts. And all the motor fibers, let's see from the prefrontal cortex, when they come, they cross. So from the right side of the motor fibers goes to the left side of the body, and from the left side, it goes to the right side of the body. That crossing of the motor tracts or motor fibers is called decussation of the pyramid. Are you following me? That's why if somebody has a stroke in the right side, the paralysis and loss of sensation will be in the left side. And if it is in the left, it will be in the right side. These are the cranial nerves: vestibulocochlear, glossopharyngeal, vagus, accessory, hypoglossal, and they all have their own function. So you see here, as I said earlier, all the cranial nerves. So let's go over these nerves. Olfactory nerve is for smell, optic is for vision, oculomotor is for eye movement. Then abducens, trochlear is also for eye movement. Like when you're voluntarily, you're moving your eyes, eyeball, that is. Abducens is also for eye movement. Trigeminal is for your, and you have to remember the Roman number 2. Trigeminal has 3 branches: ophthalmic, maxillary, and mandibular. Ophthalmic controls your eye movement, eye sensation, and tear glands. The maxillary is sensory area in the maxilla, and then mandibular. Then you have abducens here, which is also eye movement. Then facial, the sensation and motor activity of the face area. Vestibulocochlear, which is responsible for hearing and balance of your body through the inner ear. Glossopharyngeal is sensation from your pharynx and tongue area. Vagus is part of the autonomic nervous system, which goes everywhere pretty much, in the throat, in your heart, in your lungs, in your kidney, everywhere. And they control the visceral organs. Glossopharyngeal and vagus, we talked. Accessory has two parts, the medullary part and a spinal part. You see, that's why it is long. And that shrugging of the soldier is by accessory nerve. And then 12 is hypoglossal, which is the movement of your tongue. Okay, so this is the structure of all the cranial nerve from the brain stem. The core of the brain stem, pretty much midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata, particularly the medulla oblongata, have the tracts, like sensory tracts is going, motor tract is going, and when you see under microscope, they look like reticular tissue, and we call them reticular formation. So there is, in the reticular formation, you have nuclei which influence autonomic function. That's why any damage to the brain stem can cause big paralysis and death of the patient. So visceral center for the reticular formation, which is in the brain stem, are cardiac center, vasomotor center, medullary, respiratory center, which are the medulla oblongata as well as the pons. Other centers like hiccup, sneezing, swallowing, and coughing, these all are there. So from the mid pons contents, these are the nuclei. We went over these all nerves. Now, everybody knows what is difference between nerve and tract. Yes? What is difference between a nerve and a tract?
I believe the tract are in the brain, and then the nerves are like in the rest of the body, the bundle of the axons.
Good. Bundle of the axons in the peripheral nervous system, like sciatic nerve is the nerve. But in the spinal cord also there is bundle of nerves. In the brain there is also bundle of axons. They are called tract. And those tracts are several kind. So in the brain, there are several kinds of tracts. Some tracts, those tracts are three types. Projection fibers. Those fibers are called projection fiber, which project from one region of the brain and a spinal cord to another. So projection fibers, like from the brain stem or the spinal cord, when it comes to the medulla oblongata, it crosses and goes to other side. You see, this is called internal capsule, the bundle of fibers. And that is one of the example of projection fibers. You see, coming from the spinal cord and then going to the cerebrum. Another is commissural fibers. Commissural fibers connects one hemisphere of the brain to the another hemisphere of the brain. So each hemisphere of the brain is, like if I have a right and left hemisphere, they are connected to each other by the bundle of nerve fibers. And those fibers are called commissural fibers. And the best example of commissural fibers are corpus callosum. There is billions of neurons, which is covering the right hemisphere, connecting the right hemisphere to the left hemisphere. Then there is association fibers. Association fiber, which is not shown in this diagram, but let's see if I connect the parietal lobe of the brain to my frontal lobe of the brain. Let's see here. These fibers. So this will be association fibers. Got it? Deep within the white matter, we have another gray matters. You see, this area is called the diencephalon. Diencephalon has thalamus, hypothalamus, and epithalamus. And then we have basal nuclei or basal ganglia. Basal ganglia has three parts: caudate nucleus, putamen, and globus pallidus. These basal ganglia are the nuclei which controls the voluntary movements to start, initiate, continue and stop the movements. And these things happens involuntarily. It is performed by the voluntary muscle, but with unconscious mind. And any problem in this area can cause a disease. You have seen that is called which disease?
Is it called Parkinson?
That is called Parkinson's disease, okay? Where you have tremor and imbalance of the body. Okay? I think that's all for today. Do you guys have any question?
Just to reiterate, the association fibers connects one lobe of the brain to another.
Yes.